I'd like to continue talking about the second season of Battlestar Galactica, the original that never was. I'm Joe, and welcome to Starbase Nerdtron. So, in my previous video about the second season that never was for the original Battlestar Galactica, I gave the overview of what was going to happen in terms of the cast and the overall tone of the show. But now I want to talk about some of the specific scripts that had been developed for the second season that never was. The first one is The Return of the Pegasus. This is a sequel, obviously, to the terrific two-part episode with Lloyd Bridges, Living Legend. And at the end of that episode, the Pegasus goes off into space. There's an explosion. You can't really see if it's still there or not, and it's left ambiguous as to what happened to the Pegasus, although it's implied it was destroyed. In this episode, which is the kickoff for the second season, the Pegasus shows up as the Galactica is being attacked by Cylons. The Pegasus drives off the attackers, and the two ships are reunited. During the battle, a couple of things happen. Chiba is killed. Um, this is the episode where Athena gets burned all over her body, so they have to do plastic surgery, and this was going to be done to recast her, I guess. But she still holds a lot of resentment because of it, because her face is okay, but it looks very different, and her body's all scarred, so she wears heavy clothing, something like that. Uh, um, Apollo leaves command of the squadron. Starbuck is put in command of Blue Squadron, and now as they're interacting with Commander Kane, they notice he's changed a lot. There's this new character, Renata, who seems to be a replacement um, for his previous adjutant, Tolan. And it gets much more. It just gets more and more suspicious as time goes on, and Apollo and Starbuck kind of are sneaking around in the Pegasus, and they notice the crew is being taken in and out of these weird laboratories and so forth. So, things are, ramping up in terms of the tension and everything. And it turns out that Kane and Renata and most of the crew are actually cyborgs, although they call them androids. They're kind of like this next model Cylon that has been developed that's, looks just like a human. And this kind of recalls something that we saw in Galactica 1980, where we had the one advanced model Cylon who looked just like a person, who was the commander of the Cylon Raider that crashes into Earth. It's the one with Wolfman Jack. It's a ghastly episode, but it did have a couple of neat ideas, and having the human shaped Cylon was one of them. So anyway, they obviously they work it out, and they figure out what's going on, and there's a big fight in the landing bay, where Dane and Renata are fighting hand to hand with Starbuck and Apollo, and she's sent out an airlock. I don't really know what happens to Kane, but I'm assuming that he's destroyed too. Um, and that's the end of the episode. So it does a lot of lifting in terms of setting up the new characters, and getting the changes that we talked about in the last video in place. But it doesn't sound all that good. A lot of unanswered questions. How did this ever happen? Why, if the purpose of these Cylon androids is to destroy the Galactica, why did they stop the other Cylons from blowing up the Galactica at the very beginning of the episode? They could have just joined in and finished the job that way. There's a lot of the logic doesn't really work here. But if the season had been approved, then maybe a series of rewrites would have tightened up the story a little bit. The next one is a weird one, and you see these kinds of stories on a lot of shows in the 70s. Um, and we're actually going to get two of this type in this list, which is just weird. The next one is called A Woman's Power. And basically, what's going on is a bunch of women in the fleet are getting tired of the war, and they demand peace. And they basically go on strike in every way possible. The bridge officers don't show up for duty. Cooking doesn't happen, and there's no sex, and it's just this whole big suffrage kind of thing. um, and they basically uh, put in this whole women's lib thing, and I think that's part of it. Towards the end of the 70s, women's lib was already a thing, but it was, I guess this was some sort of reaction, pushback. I don't know why Glenn Larson would, particularly do that, but it's been 50 years, so attitudes have changed, I guess. And it ends up with one of with the leaders of the group are thrown into the brig, and one of them escapes and goes to the bridge with a bomb strapped to her, and Athena has to talk her down and convince her not to do it. And it turns out that Athena was only in there because she felt resentful about the damage that had been done to her own body. So it was bitterness and so forth. So it was not a very good episode. I think it would just the description of it is cringy. I'm very sure that even 12-year-old, 14-year-old me would have been a little taken aback by it. Next one is called Island in the Sky, and this is a kind of a typical one that you saw early on in the first season, where they would land on a planet. There's some humans, and something happens and they leave. And this is one like that. The planet that Starbuck and Apollo land on is has this very high gravity field, so they can't uh, really move. They certainly couldn't take off again. They're only saved by a couple of humans that seem to have an energy field around them that negates the heavy gravity. So with the help of these humans, they go and they find the human outpost that's here, and it turns out that they are from Earth. They're exiles from Earth, and they know the coordinates of Earth, so they want to get them and you know and take the fleet there. But obviously they say they can't leave, and there's this big secret that goes on. And Apollo falls in love with one of the leaders of the people, and they're briefly imprisoned, and then they find out that the reason they can't leave isn't because of the gravity; it's because of the fact that they are all 1,000 years old, and they will rapidly age if they leave the planet. So there's hijinks ensue, and they eventually do leave the planet with the woman that Apollo falls in love with. But true to her word, she ages rapidly and dies before they make it to the fleet. It's a neat one. Like I say, it's very reminiscent of the early first season ones, like the Young Warriors and things like that, where they go, they have an adventure, and they come back to the fleet, and nothing really changes. Uh, I don't know why they would really need the coordinates because they already got them from in War of the Gods. But yeah. And I actually liked the idea of Experiment in Terra a lot better than having a very high tech civilization for Earth. But so be it. It's better than uh, the flying motorcycles. Speaking of which, the next episode we have is The Bad and the Brave. So there's a battle between the Cylons and the fleet. Both the Galactica and the Cylon base star are damaged, and they move off to make repairs. They go to a planet, and the orphan ship has crash landed on a planet as part of the battle. So they have to go to the Starbuck takes some warriors on what are called turbo scooters, and these are, yes, the flying motorcycles that we saw in Galactica 1980. He's recycling a few ideas here to put the kids, um, and then they discover that the Cylons are also there to get raw materials to help repair the ship. So they're able to stop the Cylons using guerrilla tactics and basically save the day. Um, because they need to stop the Cylons from repairing their ship. They get back to the Galactica, and they prove victorious. So um, next one is called A Plague in Space. And it's just what it says on the tin. There's a deadly disease ravaging the colonial fleet, and they don't know how to stop it. And Boomer, who remember is now the big scientist guy, and Cassiopeia, who is now the head of the life sciences department. Uh, they eventually have to find a cure for this ancient disease that used to have that came from cobalt. So they must have picked it up in Lost Planet of the Gods, but why it was sitting there dormant all this time, we don't know. But it doesn't sound all that amazing. Yeah, and they already did it in Lost Planet of the Gods, because we had that, the disease that they picked up on the listening post. So that took out all the warriors. So it was kind of a meh kind of idea. And Here we go with the last one, and this is what I say when I said earlier about the women's lib thing. We're getting another one. This is called A Queen's Ransom. The Galactica needs to get some sort of crystals that are necessary for the power supply. They find them on this planet, but the planet is dominated by women, and men are enslaved and forced to perform labor. This is an idea that we already saw in it was either Planet Earth or Earth 2, the Gene Roddenberry thing with Dylan Hunt as the 20th century guy who's put in suspended animation and wakes up 500 years later. This was one of the plots that we saw there. And basically the colonials go down there and incite a rebellion amongst the men who want equal rights. Um, but the queen wants Apollo on her on to be her concubine. So yeah, another cringy story. These are all the only ones that I could find. There are probably other treatments out there that were considered for the second season. And if this was part of the proposal to the network, then maybe I understand why they didn't get a second season. Some of these are pretty bad. Some of them are okay, but on the whole, I am unimpressed with the stories here. Um, but then again, I'm also viewing it from the nostalgia of it's not just like the original, so maybe that's coloring my judgment a little bit. So anyway, I'd love to hear from you in the comments what you think about these stories. Do you agree with my assessment of some of these? Do you know of any that I didn't cover in here? That I'd love to hear about that. And I hope you're all having a great day, and I will talk to you all later.